Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. I'd love to introduce Bronislav Czarnocha and
No.
Czarnocha and Malgorzata Marciniak, who are joining us this morning in the Relatorium seminar for their talk. And it's the first time we're actually having two speakers. And so we're going to try to make this more of a dialogue. The way this will work, at least how we're planning it, is they will each take maybe 10 minutes or so to introduce their ideas about creativity in mathematics and the relationship between teaching and research in mathematics. And then we will have a little bit of a moderated dialogue between the two perspectives that I will help put together. And in the meantime, as the audience has questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat and perhaps raise your hand. And at about half hour, 40-minute mark, thereabouts, we will transition to have a broader conversation with the participants, the audience. So thank you very much. And without further ado, Mal and Broni, please take it away.
Is there the slide that introduces our talk, maybe? So the title, do you have?
Yeah, I can share the slide.
Show this slide. It's important, yeah, because I want to say something about that. Right. So in other words, well, that's what it is, of course, but I'm not sure whether our perspectives are opposing or complementary, right? So maybe together we'll decide. And I think we agreed, Malgorzata, that I am starting. Am I correct, or you are starting?
Yes, go ahead and begin. And
I'm sorry?
yes, go ahead and begin when you
Okay.
finished an hour.
Okay, 1 minute.
Well, I have to stop sharing.
1 minute, yeah, 1 minute, yeah. Okay, here it is. So the question is for me, here is share. So I will share my screen here. Where do I share it? Right here. Okay. Right. So in other words, I would like to talk about this concept of mathematics teaching research. First, what is mathematics teaching research? There are many sort of approaches, but all of them, it seems to me, they coalesce in the following sense. Well, teaching research is the classroom methodology of teaching by the classroom teacher conducted simultaneously with the investigation of teaching and student learning by the same teacher. So the way I see it, or the way I'm sorry, the way I see it and the way I practice it is well, this one person, teacher or researcher, has the dual nature, right? On one hand, he or she is teaching. On the other hand, she or he is investigating the very process of teaching and learning that's happening in the classroom, right? So the teacher plays this kind of dual role, and I would like to say that the first person who really introduced a teaching research into the profession was a Stenhouse, who was a professor at East Anglia in the 70s. And one of the best, sort of most synthetical description of that process is the Stenhouse Act, which is a classroom act, which is at once an educational act and a research act, right? So that is one act that has both components, and I will try to show a couple of them in my presentation. Let me go to the next, right? So we sort of start with mathematics teaching research, but what about creativity? What exactly is creativity? And our sort of my approach comes from the creativity of aha moment, and I'm sure that all of us know from one's own experience the aha moment, right? It is that moment where suddenly something becomes very clear, which before was not. Right, and here I am sort of basing my whole discussion on the Arthur Koestler approach, which he published in 1964 in a volume called The Act of Creation. So the way we sort of approach it is the creativity of aha moment is also called bisociation, is the spontaneous leap of insight which connects two unconnected matrices of thought through the discovery of a hidden analogy between them. That's sort of a Koestler addition to all of it, this hidden analogy. However, what I want to point out is that the aha moment, right, has three components, right? It has spontaneous leap of insight. It has two unconnected matrices of thought or frames of reference, and the bridge that is created exactly at the moment of insight, right, which connects those two unconnected matrices of thought. And well, in the later, I have one or two examples, depends on the time, where I would like to show exactly that moment of creativity in the process of an aha moment that I have been able to observe. So after those two statements, well, there is one more, which is called bisociative frame. So what is first the word bisociative? What does it mean bisociative? Well, it's sort of an opposition to the idea of associative, right? Associative means that one event is associated with another and with another, kind of a linear approach. Whereas bisociative means that the event is connected to two reference systems, right? In our case, in this definition, right, a bisociative frame are those unconnected matrices of thought which get or might get connected during the illumination through aha moment. We have abstracted this concept actually from the definition based on Koestler, right? And here I just would like to show, I don't know, how does it show? Oh yeah, that's how it showed the book, right? Well, I don't know how to do it with this background. Forget it. And here, what is important about bisociative frame is that it really is a discoverer of possible creativity, in the sense that we have applied this concept to different theories of learning, and in each we could show those parts of the theories that underlie possible enhanced creativity. And what is interesting is, of course, that in our profession, research and teaching are unfortunately very separated from each other, and yet both of them focus on learning, so that the teaching research forms a very potent bisociative frame which underlies its creativity. So those are like three concepts that underlie our work, and I would like to show two other slides, and it will take, okay, two other slides. One slide is here, and I would like to show it. Okay, right, and let me show it, right. I always am confused when I am in those different, here, share, right, share, here it is. This is what is called a teaching research cycle. Do you see the cycle? Yeah, you do. Okay. So this is a teaching research cycle, right? And as I mentioned, right, the teaching research is essentially an outgrowth of Levin's idea of action research, right? And action research has the idea of the cycles, right? That the research doesn't happen kind of linearly, but it happens via cycles, and together they grow like a spiral, right? So let me just shortly describe this cycle here. Red and blue are sort of two cycles that one would like to present. And the cycle starts right here, right, when we diagnose student knowledge, right? This is more about the teaching experiment, how it happens, right? We diagnose student knowledge. On that basis of diagnosis, we design the intervention whose goal is to improve students' learning. Generally, I would like to add that our teaching research was geared especially for the improvement of learning. It was created in Hostos Community College, which is the South Bronx, where the improvement of learning is of utmost importance, right? And once we design, then of course we general materials using guided discovery, and we implement. We implement this intervention together with collection of the data. And of course, you see here different types of collection of the data, right? Homeworks, one-on-one interviews, student tests, and so on. And then we have this teaching experiment taking place till we collected data and we are analyzing them. And this node, precisely this one here, is precisely the node where the opportunity for creativity takes place. Creativity of the teacher or of the teacher researcher, right? Because on one hand, here we have the craft knowledge of the teacher coming from that very teaching experiment that took place. And on the other hand, we have educational theories of learning. So here are those two matrices, which I observe they are often disconnected. And the process of rethinking the cycle is precisely the process where on one hand, theories of learning, and on the other hand, craft knowledge of the teacher comes into interaction, producing a new hypothesis, new claims, already prototypes of learning trajectories, right? So this is one full cycle, right? And then we go to the next cycle where we redesign, right? The same story. This particular approach is very good for finding learning trajectories. So this is an example of how teaching research works, right? And let me go back to my right. So this is I was talking about bisociative frame, and here I would like to show, if I have time, tell me that one aha moment.
Yes, one example would be great, but let's keep it short. And
Right.
also, you're still not sharing the new slide. You're still sharing the slide about the cycle.
Yeah, right. 1 minute, yeah. Okay, here it is. So this is an example of an aha moment which has a name elephant. And what we have here are two young students, third grade, two classmates, age 10. One of them understood the problem and explains to the other. And the problem is standard problem, right? And Przemek, that is P, write the equation x plus 12 equals 76. He solved it, and then he drew an interval to explain to Bart, right? He says one interval, another interval, plus 12 equals 76. So Bart doesn't understand and asks many different questions. Why interval this equation? Prem is saying, well, it's unimportant. Why 76? And so on, right? So he doesn't understand. Then Przemek tries the second approach and says, look, here is a little square from the book, right? One square, another square, plus 12 equals 76, which is another approach, right? But still Bartek does not understand Przemek is talking about window, not a square, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work, even though Przemek gives him an example. 2 windows are equal 64. 1 window, therefore, is 32. Well, you subtract 12 from both sides and you see that the 2 windows are 64. But are there numbers in the windows, right, says Bart. He doesn't understand. And then after those 2 cases, suddenly Przemek says, an elephant and an elephant is equal 64. Therefore, what is 1 elephant equal to? 2 elephants are equal 64. So 1 elephant is equal to what? And here is a moment of understanding by Bart. I see. 1 elephant is 32. And then another, if 2 elephants are 60, then 1 elephant is what? 1 elephant is 30. I see it now. And big expression attack. So he has this moment, aha moment, at the end. However, I really am more interested in the Przemek approach, and notice, right, that he's sort of asking the questions, right, showing, trying to explain, but at the same time, he's investigating level of understanding of Bart. First, he talked about intervals, which doesn't go, then he talked about windows, which doesn't, and then he has this incredible moment when he forgets about all those methods and has an insight. He says, an elephant. Right, an elephant and an elephant is equal 64. That moment was the creative moment of Przemek. And why elephant? I can talk separately about it, but clearly what happened here was the change of thinking, which turned out to be much closer to the thinking of Bart. And on this, I would stop at this point.
Thank you, Broni. Thank you for the example. Mal, why don't you take it away?
May I ask Broni to stop sharing?
Stop sharing, great.
Yes.
Yeah, stop sharing. Yes.
I will start sharing my slides. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to start in the middle. I hope it's good now. So I'm going to talk about creativity as a collaboration between conscious and subconscious. And I will explain at some point what subconscious is. So to kind of start, I need to explain that I was originally trained as a pure mathematician, and I started working with my students on applied mathematics problems. I realized that they are somehow different. Those are the same students that were in my classes, and I just could not understand why those are different, in some way different people. So I started reading about creativity, and the first book that I saw was by Graham Wallace, The Art of Thought, and he introduced this preparation, incubation, illumination, verification stages. Verification is like a reflection of the previous stages. Now, and then I started reading about works of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. It's originally Hungarian. That's why his name is so unusual. And he spoke about flow. And then I understood why my students were different, because they experienced creative flow, and creative flow is equal to kind of emphasizes happiness and joy. So I will discuss that, and I think having a picture is really good way to explain. So imagine that there is conscious parts of you and subconscious parts of you. Conscious, that's what is in your mind stream. You're aware of that and you know what it is. Now, subconscious, think that it's everything else. So this picture is not really the way it is, but I want to focus, like zoom in into the way they connect. So in the light of what Wallace says, we would have this preparation stage, which is conscious. And then from preparation, we go kind of consciously forget about the topic, and it needs to simmer in the subconscious for some time. And then if the circumstances are right, then we might have this epiphany, this moment when we start understanding things. once this happens, we might have to verify whether this understanding is accurate. So that's more or less what Graham Wallace says. Now let me go one step further and explain what Csikszentmihalyi adds to it. Well, he says after verification, we might realize that something was missing, and then we kind of need to maybe study another piece of mathematics, have another piece of preparation, and again we have to go through this incubation stage and repeat certain number of time, and those repetitive moments of illumination, those are the times when we feel really happy. Of course, we can be satisfied by the results, but they don't give us this prime happiness. It's the message from subconscious that is so delightful. I would like to show you some modifications. Well, you can think about the way you would modify this picture. So how about something like this? If we teach a lesson to students, very often they completely not pay attention, and they don't go through the incubation stage, because to be able for subconscious to absorb this information and somehow relate to it, there must be some additional process. So Broni just told me that there's another paper by Smith, and he discusses intimation. I've seen other papers that speak about internalization, but somehow things have to sync to the subconscious. It might help if a student only has a question about it. That's why problem-based learning might be more suitable, and problem posing might support this intimation, but it is a necessary stage of the creative thought. Now, incubation might take a second, 2 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 days, a year. We never know when we get this illumination. And then the verification stage plus preparation stage, I'll call it a verification and a reflection, in this sense that it is not only a conscious reflection. We might actually go back and forth a few times and apply this intuition to those results. And the changing distance between subconscious and conscious, it means that the more we work back and forth, then easier it gets. So the distance between conscious and subconscious actually gets, in some way, it gets smaller if we keep practicing this back and forth discussion. So if you would like some creative question, I can ask now. So how would you modify this? How is it for you? Do you have any additional stages, or do you have any other things that you would put into this picture? So the one I would do is very often subconscious is visualized as the iceberg, and that's what it is. The consciousness is really just a few percent of the whole totality of the mind. So imagine that consciousness is a spotlight, and everything else what is in darkness, that's the subconscious. So usually you know what is in consciousness. That is just what we have in our mind stream. But where this mind stream comes from, that's the subconscious. So let me speak a little bit about some subconscious, because that's something usually less clear. So this concept of subconscious, it has a little unclear origin. So the first person who tried to define it and speak about it in certain frame of Sigmund Freud. However, I read about it from Carl Gustav Jung and few other psychologists. For example, I just lost his name. William.
James?
Yes, William James, exactly, thank you. So subconscious has multiple layers. The first layers are, let's say, if you had a dream last night and you remember scraps of it, this is like the first layer of subconscious. Or if you forgot something and you remember it, this is like the very, very shallow layer of subconscious. But it goes to deeper subconsciousness. And on the bottom of it, there is this universal subconsciousness. That was actually defined by Carl Gustav Jung. So we all have that as our human experience. Let me give you some examples. So in STEM fields, subconscious, that's where our mathematical intuition fits. Subconscious contains, say I walked around London just today many times, and subconsciously I think I memorized more than I consciously remember. And I have a dream about it, and the dream might consolidate all this information, this uncertain information. I always think that all the research about learning goes nowhere because it's about consciousness, but long-term learning happens in subconscious, but as well superficial learning and stereotypes, it's all in the subconscious. Similarly, subtle impressions. You have an artwork, you look at it and it stirs you. It exactly stirs the subconscious or your associations. Sometimes I see a color, I can literally smell it, or I can taste it. At some point, I experimented with different light colors, and I would think, like my mind would think, oh, this color tastes so good. And that's exactly connection to subconscious. Similarly, if there's a vast amount of information that you have to absorb, some of it goes to subconscious because consciousness is very limited. So let me remind you what consciousness is about. You probably know. Consciousness is about formalism. It is about short-term learning, about certainty. And consciously connections, we can create connections, and our mind is not about just knowing, it's about connecting things. So consciousness requires this positive reinforcement to strengthen connections. However, subconscious requires exactly the same thing to strengthen connections. Just keep walking around those paths. So this is my take on creativity. Let me go back to those slides as the dynamical relationship between conscious and subconscious. Conscious as spotlight, subconscious vastness, the iceberg, right? The whole bottom of the iceberg, which goes very deep. So I'm finishing my presentation now. So I stop sharing. And I think this is the moment when me and Broni, we should ask questions to each other.
Right. Well, thank you both very much. Okay, let me see if I can pin. Well, anyway, I just want to make sure I can have you both on my views. But yeah. Okay. So thank you. You introduced a number of very inspiring ideas, and I'd like to know more. I will encourage again the audience to put questions in the chat if you want. So I'll seek to incorporate them. I do have a few questions to get us started, and then at some point I'll transition primarily to conversation with the audience. But just to get you going, one thing that I wanted to understand better, Broni, from you, was, there was a question of associativity that you brought up, right? And in particular, you kind of attempted to show how biassociativity involves specifically something more than traditional associativity. That you wanted to highlight the fact that there were, well, what I heard was the notion of a triad. In other words, that there was, you didn't say it outright, but I want to prompt you to say more about that, because this has been a theme that we've talked about in the past. Specifically, the notion that in biassociative reasoning, you're looking at two connections coming out of every one element, as opposed to just one, and so that there's a more a richer data structure involved, essentially, to keep track of the connections. Does that strike you as a good analogy? Could you guide us for how to think about biassociative reasoning?
Yeah, no, that's, let me say, yeah, right. So let me take a Malgorzata presentation as an example of bisociative reasoning. And what is this bisociative reasoning? It is the reasoning that is anchored in two different, well, let me repeat, matrices of thought. In the case of what Malgorzata was talking, one matrix of thought was consciousness and another matrix of thought was unconscious, right? And that the bisociativity is the event that takes place from both of them simultaneously and creates something new, the bridge between them. Do you get me? Right? It is not, first, it is not the linear process. It is a non-linear, right? Because it comes from two. Associativity, as I understand it, is in our mind, right? One thought follows by another thought, by another thought. A somewhat linear process within one matrix, for example, of understanding. On the other hand, the bisociative has to have two of them out of which the idea comes. In terms of the triad, of course, that is a bit more, but I agree with you. And in fact, there is a triad in it, but one has to really then understand it a bit better. There is what I called a Piaget-Garcia triad of conceptual development. And it indeed is connected with three events. But what are those three events? Well, one event is one matrix, another event is another matrix, unconnected, and the creativity is the third event, right, which is built on base of those two unconnected ones. That is, well, that is a triad that, as I said, has much deeper sort of, has much deeper roots, right, in Piaget work. What is important in this triad that it is triad based on similarity, not on opposition, right? We know about classical triad, thesis, antithesis, right? But this one, this in particular, doesn't go like that because it's based on similarity rather than contradiction. What else I would like to say? Well, I am, and I was presenting some time ago this idea of fairy tales, right? Where this triad exactly is one of the elements, founding elements of some fairy tales. Did I answer your question a bit?
Yes. Yeah, certainly. I mean, I'm starting to see. I think what I had in mind was more of an attempt at formalizing the what you were just saying now. In other words, that this biassociative relationship is not one of opposition, but one of composition, almost. Right. And Mal, I wonder if you have a take on this. Where would you see kind of triadic relationships of this kind that allow composition? I mean, I think in your presentation, for me, it's almost like how you go from the once around the loop to connecting it and making it kind of like a spiral where you go back and forth, a flow, as you were saying. So what I had written as a question was how do you go from the previous verification to the next preparation? How does it link together? But
right. So this is a good point. I would understand that this excitement that comes from illumination, it gives energy for further considerations, I'll say it that way. So in one of those pictures, I kind of drew the line up because I thought that this is the creative flow that is unfolding this way, that the first illumination gives excitement and energy for the next investigation, which gives more excitement and more energy for another investigation. So this kind of opens up, like this entropy kind of gets so much boost. But then at some point, those illuminations, they start getting smaller, and then this entire creative process might kind of die off itself. So that's when you kind of stop thinking about it. And many processes are abandoned this way, that we start thinking about something and kind of like we don't get this boost from this illumination that is so exciting. So we abandon the subject.
What you make me think now is a kind of a view of emotions, the emotive annotations, let's say, of the thoughts, because you haven't mentioned that, but that clearly is there somewhere, and I wonder where you would put it as a source of energy, almost like in a physics, in a physical analogy, where you kind of need to overcome a certain barrier, and you have this sort of energy allows you, that makes more.
Somehow we stop hearing you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, right. Yeah, I guess there might have been some instability in the network. I was imagining, I was playing on the analogy, you indicated about the energy. So I was thinking the emotion, the motive annotations to the thoughts might be a source of energy that gives you a boost, makes more reformulations, for example, of a problem accessible to you. And so you can consider more possibilities or something like that. What I wonder in this context is the direction this takes, because obviously energy is a scalar, if you will, right? Like it can boost you, it can make more of the landscape accessible to you, but how do you choose what direction you will take? So imagine you are in your illumination stage and you have this boost of emotive energy, you feel sort of an elation associated with that insight, the aha moment. But then where do you put that? What makes you not simply be content and sort of say, that's good enough? Why do you, and in particular, among the many things you could try to explore, how do you create the next preparation stage to link to the next loop in your, I view it as a helix, the flow that you were talking about.
Yeah, so this is a good point. So I would imagine it somehow like a cell. So consciousness and subconsciousness are like two cells, and they exchange certain information, and sometimes in exchange they can get this energy. So consciously we can, if we have time and if we can access resources, we can create more, let's say more information to exchange. But it happened to me many times that I would get this illumination. I was on the train or somewhere outside of my resources, and I kind of forgot about what I thought. Right, so I forgot about this illumination, like what it really came from it. Without writing down what I thought, I'll come home and just forget about it. So it really takes a very subtle attention towards your creative process to be able to boost it and keep boosting it so it keeps coming properly. And one thing for me is to I got a cell phone where I can write things on the screen, and I can see myself just sitting on the subway or just being randomly somewhere, and then suddenly I get this idea. I pull my cell phone and write down what occurred to me, and then I can go home when I have time. I can open all those notes and say, oh, I thought about that. Okay, let me investigate it now and connect to those subconscious thoughts. So
it
just to
makes me feel
summarize, yeah.
right. No, I appreciate that. And now as a follow-up to both of you, what I was thinking to ask before I open it up to the questions from the audience is the effect that your perspectives on creativity might have to the teaching practice, to the practice in the classroom. And in particular, now the connection I want to draw is from what you were just saying, Mal. You're pointing out the utility of writing things down, of sort of some form of journaling. That's a practice that you have found useful in yourselves, and I think we all have at various times. So, what role do you think that might play in a classroom setting, in a learning setting, and how might one kind of encourage it? And
very
then
good point.
in a related way, Broni, you showed us a fascinating example of a transcript of the interactions, a dialogue. It reminded me, very much of like Lakatosh's dialogue, for example, fictional dialogue. But I wonder if a tool of this kind, what role do you see it possibly playing in the classroom setting, whether it be something that the students themselves could find utility in, or it could be of utility for for the teacher as they are observing their own practice or each other's practice. So becoming more aware of where the aha moment arises and how, and sort of inquiring into it. What role might that play in a classroom setting?
Malgorzata, would you like to start?
Yes, I will start answering this. So writing things down is just an example. But what is the key thing is that the teacher must be aware of the creative process, of their own creative process, to be able to catch very subtle signals from the teacher, from the students, that they are on creative discovery. And students are sometimes very young and they don't have much insight in their own mind. So without having this awareness, the teacher is not going to encourage right moments. That's my take on it. Thank you.
Right. Well, in this dialogue that you said, that wasn't fictional, that was real. And and what is important, you see, you ask what use, right? So let's assume that this P, right? Przemek is the teacher and the Bart is a student. So what was the role of Przemek? The role of Przemek was to ask first questions, right, that he wanted to explain to Bart. But at the same time, he understood that it doesn't work. So, in other words, he was not only trying to explain, but he was also investigating how does Bart think. And he realized, after two examples that the same way doesn't go, must be another way. Okay, and that's where he came with the elephant, right? In general, I would say, at least from my take, is that I have another example, and I actually collected. In one of my classes, I did explain to students what is aha moment, and I asked them to pay attention to their own thinking. And actually, I collected this way like 5 aha moments. All of them were all of them were connected with either solving problem or an afterthought of solving problem. So the second aspect of the teacher in this is finding the right problem. Not every problem would cause the aha moment, but it also depends, actually, of course, on the state of the student, right? So here is the thing. The role of a teacher is on one hand to assess the state of knowledge of the student, and on the other hand to provide such a questions or example which might cause exactly the illumination.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. I want to more deliberately open it up at this point to a broader conversation rather than respond to you. Irfan has posted two questions on the chat, one for Broni explicitly and one for Mal. But rather than reading them out loud, maybe Irfan, and in the interest of having more voices heard, perhaps you can you know, tell us your question, Irfan.
Yeah, so I was a bit confused, Brownie, about what you said about Stenhouse. What did he actually do in the 1970s? You were saying he started some teaching research, but I was confused what you meant by that.
Okay, let me just. I read your question in the chat, right? And what you say. He started teaching research, but that seems wrong to me, as I am sure research on teaching had been done before. I agree. But there is a big difference between research on teaching and teaching research. Research on teaching takes the teaching as the subject of its work. Research on teaching, right? On the other hand, teaching research is an integrated process in which teaching and research occur simultaneously. They are not separated from each other as they are in the question of research on teaching. Research on teaching presupposes the object of investigation, right? Teaching, and a researcher is the investigator, right? In teaching research, the two are connected. That is to say, uh, you might say that there is a change between subject and object, right? At some point, the object of research is teaching, but at the same time, the object of research is the teacher act themselves. Okay, so this one person becomes sometimes the object of the research, and sometimes the subject of his own research.
Perhaps this is an instance, Broni, of the bisociative relationship or the triadic relationship we're getting at. That in some sense, I'm trying to, another analogy I've used for a similar, I think, phenomenon is that, teaching and research, in your view, are sort of flip sides of the same coin, so that there is some higher order object that entails both of those simultaneously. So their practice is kind of, but more than that, it's not just that in one instance you can be one and in another instance you can be another, but that in every instance you're both. In some ways it's like a feedback loop, so it's pointless to say, well, where are you in the feedback loop? It's the loop itself that is the essence. I don't know if I mean, I don't know, Irfan, if that is satisfactory. You seem to have more to say.
No, I have more to say. So I was wondering if the research that is happening in teaching research is still related to the teaching, right? It's still about how to uh, improvise, let's say, the teaching based on how the teaching is going, right?
That's something like that. Yes.
Yeah,
That's what you
okay.
say seems close to what I have in mind, right? That it is. Yeah, go ahead.
But in some sense, from the student's point of view, it is also like mathematical research in the traditional sense, because even if the topic is not of a quote unquote research level for the students, since the topic is new and they are learning, they are in some sense encouraged to get these illuminations and so on. So in some sense, the students are doing mathematical research, even though they are doing mathematical research about very elementary things. So is that the sense in which you said that we should keep teaching and research not separate because they both happen in the same instance in the student's mind?
Yeah, you were saying something very important, namely, yes, that yeah, yes, that student is doing mathematics, no doubts, right? And the aha moment that came here was aha moment about mathematics, about how to solve the equation. On the other hand, the mentor, for him, it wasn't the question of mathematics, but for him was the question how to explain that mathematics. And it is in the process of explanation that he was doing research at the same time, because he was finding out how the students think. And only on the basis of that, of those two failures in explanation, he came with the third approach.
Right.
May I add something here? First of all, I'm very, very glad, Irfan, you brought that up. It wasn't, it was something I should have foreseen and I didn't. And this is an instance of where the whole becomes more than the sum of the parts. I think I'm very glad you illuminated this. But what I will add here is that in my experience, it also, for the teacher, it feels like an act of research, an act of illumination for you, not only for the student, in an effort to create new perspectives to for the thing itself, or more importantly, something that was not seen explicitly in the dialogue you pointed out, or at least you didn't bring it up. Maybe if we read it in more detail, it might be more obvious. In an attempt that the teacher is trying to make to incorporate the perspective that the student is presenting, which seems incongruous temporarily, at least, you are engaging in an act of research in enlarging the representation schemes you had in mind and saying, oh, this new perspective might also be part of the concern that you have for why is it that, the window or whatever it is that, the specific question that the student has, or the specific kind of suggestion for a possibility, which at first seems like it's not wrong, it's not right, it's not what you had in mind. You as the teacher are engaging in a form of representational research, almost, to think this thing that you know that but you didn't know that it also has these other facets, right, that it could plausibly be misunderstood in this way. And so I think it's in some ways the feeling of research, and to echo Mal, also this sort of illumination that you're getting at that characterizes research, of seeing something anew as though you didn't know it, right? Kind of happens all the time in the loop that you showed, Broni, that it happens both, and it happened, thankfully, from what Irfan suggested, it happens for the student as well. It's not just the teacher who's doing the research.
Absolutely.
The student is doing research.
Yes.
And it goes hand in hand. It's an ingredient of the loop.
The whole thing, yes. And I want to emphasize what Irfan pointed out, that student was doing mathematics, and his aha moment was about mathematics. On the other hand, Przemek, that is to say, the mentor, was not doing mathematics. Mentor was doing pedagogy, right? That was a pedagogical effort of his, how to explain. And his aha moment was within the context of pedagogy. If you want to read, by the way, more about 1 minute about Lawrence Stenhouse, right? So the difference is Stenhouse introduced this process of simultaneous, and I gave one example of what I called Stenhouse Act, right? It's an education act which is at the same time a research act. That is Stenhouse. Okay, the research on teaching doesn't have it. The research on teaching, well, you have, or on learning, you have the subject and the object. Here in this, the two become one.
Thank
Do
you.
you get me? Do you get me? Yeah. Okay.
Are
So,
there
uh,
any? Yeah, you had a
I
question
have
for Mal as well. Yes, yeah.
I had that, but I also want to follow up just very briefly. Just sociologically, when we say that teaching and research has been separated in our society, we usually mean that the research of mathematics and the teaching of mathematics, they are separated. So if I was to apply for a job, I would be either have to be very good in research, in which case I would get a position at a research university, or I would have to apply for a teaching specific job at a teaching university or at a research university with a teaching emphasis. But then my research, mathematical research, would not be judged as much. So there is that type of divide, but uh, is that is relevant to this discussion at all? Like here, a teacher is doing a research, but it's a different type of research than mathematical research, as you
Exactly. I
described.
agree. That is
Uh,
the point. That
but
I
yet
was
there is
talking.
a,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yet I think there is still a sense in which uh, is giving our teachers some creative freedom to also do their own mathematical research, irrespective of what they are teaching in class, might enhance their own creativity. So, is that a sociological concern we should think about?
Okay. So answering two, right? One is yes, the research. I meant educational research, not research in mathematics. What is very the divide I was talking about is the divide between educational research and between the teaching. In fact, both Malgorzata and me are part of the editorial team of Mathematics Teaching Research Journal, and one of the main problems that we receive is precisely that that the authors develop educational research using, of course, mostly statistical methods, but in no way, and in very few cases, we have that very idea presented in the classroom. That is the divide I'm talking about. In terms of your question about how teaching can motivate mathematical research, I have something to say, but it's too long for now. But
Yeah,
I agree with you. Yeah.
we can discuss later. And to Mal, my question was how, in a nutshell, my question was basically how to encourage or accommodate different students' needs for different incubation periods. As you said, incubation periods can vary. Even for one student, it can vary at different states of mind depending on what's going on in the life of the student. And our education system does not accommodate what's going on in the life of the student too much. And definitely does not accommodate different incubation periods. We are expected to learn and then reproduce in exams very quickly.
Yes, I entirely agree. Actually, I wrote an entire book about your question because that was as well my question. So this all those stages that are subconscious, we cannot control them, and we can only influence them. Well, good news is that we are very social beings. Even if some of us are introverts, we are in general social beings, and we can copy states of mind and mind processes of other people. So if a student experiences and observes another student or the teacher going through a creative process, they recognize it and their mind knows to repeat it. And same thing if they recognize their own creative process, they want to repeat it. So it's just a matter of starting it. So we could have either short, very, very brief creative assignments, something that happens like in 15 minutes of the classroom, a little longer class projects, and outside of class, like a year-long assignments. But there's never a guarantee that this particular student will go through those creative processes the way I described. Now, how can I recognize which students will go through what creative processes? It all depends on cognitive functions. So it seems that we all have our favorite cognitive functions, and that was described by Carl Gustav Jung. And he actually originally called it psychological types, which he really meant mind types. So yes, we can approximate what stimuli the student needs to perform in an optimal way their subconscious states. If we know their conscious states, they are kind of paired up. Fascinating topic.
Fascinating. Well, we're about at the hour mark, so this is
Matt had the questions here. I see the question, very important. I would like to talk a bit.
yeah.
Matt was asking two questions. One question, isn't a Socratic method of teaching a research teaching in the same sense? And I would say yes, to a degree, yes, right? Because what did Socrates do? I mean, he was asking questions, right? Taking the answers, and on the basis of the answers, he was proceeding with the next, either thinking or questioning. I agree. You also mentioned the Texas method, which I really am very fond of. I actually, I was in close contact with one of his students, Majavier, who was in Atlanta, in Emory University, right? And yes, however, you see, for example, I got from him one collection called Calculus 1 in 140 Problems. So the whole thing was sort of prepared in advance, right? Very, very beautifully, very consistently, right? But I didn't see them doing research on student thinking in that. That I didn't see there. And in that sense, in my understanding, the research, the educational research was missing. It was essentially teaching of a very, very sophisticated subject in a very beautiful manner. But there was no investigation of student thinking.
So thank you for addressing that. But as I see it, these Texas method and Moore method teachers and Socratic method, they were more into the praxis. Okay, so the teacher does that research on the fly during class, but it's not research about the teaching research, it's research teaching or teacher teaching research for that purpose during that class time.
Yeah.
Essentially. Okay. Yeah. And that's the example you showed, essentially, in my view. Okay. But you're also talking about, as I understand it now, educational research about the teaching research praxis, which would be different in a sense.
Well,
because if you're talking about papers submitted to the journal, then it sounds like you're talking more about people investigating how to implement the teaching research model in class, how to analyze how it works, how to study the students' research in their mind, as well as the teacher's research in their mind as it goes live during the class.
May I interject one thing, Broni, before you reply? I want to add something to this and hear your opinion on it. But so the question is this: it seems to me that there's an opportunity for this process of inquiring into the sense making that the student engages in, for it to itself be mathematical. In other words, to be formal, to be to have a sense of progressively expanding the set of representations of the thing itself that we were talking about. Imagine that you were trying to teach, let's say, about polynomials, right? And you were doing it from a particular perspective, using a particular, a canonical form of polynomials. And then the student, in trying to engage with it and make sense of it, they came up with an alternate representation, for example, requiring a graphical or some other form, or pointing out an analogy that you hadn't thought. And then you sort of found a way to encompass that in your perspective of how to represent a polynomial. And so in my thinking, and I don't know if this bridges the two perspectives, Matt, as well, I'm asking here, but it feels to me as though that sort of meta-mathematical act is in some ways formalizable. It speaks to a kind of understanding better the relationship between the things that we say, the symbols we write, for example, on the blackboard, the ways in which we, what the textbook says, what the problem statement says, and then the space of meaning that we have, and that we all are striving to have a consonant meaning, but we don't. Clearly, at that point, the student and the teacher have, meanings that are not that are in conflict, appear incongruous, right? And somehow we're trying to encompass or transform the representation to allow for congruence to occur. And so I think there's the potential in this space to represent this process in a somewhat mathematical way. After all, you mentioned bisociation. That seems to me a very mathematical concept in itself. So there's a bit of meta-mathematics going on here.
Okay, so first let me answer to Matt. And we see the difference is, okay, now I hear. The way I understand, you see, educational research, for example, someone thinks out some intervention to improve, right? Okay, so the teacher runs this intervention and has certain criteria with respect to which he or she assesses this, right? So assessment in those situations usually is statistical, quantitative, right? They want to show that certain number of students really were helped, right? And they stop on it. You see, the point is that teaching research will be at the moment where, in addition to those conclusions, the degree to which the intervention didn't work, if they make the next step, if they design the teaching process based on the result of research. That would be teaching research. On the other hand, that's what, well, at least what we usually get is a pure quantitative analysis, right? And there is, so we don't know whether it really works or whether it doesn't work, whether it's connected to the particular situation in the classroom and so on. So that is my objection. And also there were quite a few articles in the literature about this divide. And this divide is not only on the level of the subject, but we know this divide is also in terms of status, right? Academic status, right? Teachers and academic workers are belonging to very different communities, and there is a very big break between them. Okay, so that's how I see it. If I could ask Matt, what is this behind your head? What is this structure?
Oh, so it's an image that showed up in my Facebook feed. As I recall, I had it on ever since it came through, and that was a few weeks ago. It's an example of what physics and engineering can do for society, or something like that. And now I don't remember.
Tell me, do you have that?
I think it's a meme of a sort, and it's got the actual image has words on it, and it's been a while since I downloaded it, so I'll have to hunt it up in my
It's okay. It's okay.
photos. But I'll let you know. But I posted something else in the replies. There's a website you might want to look at called JIBLM, for the Journal of Inquiry-Based Learning in Mathematics.
JIBLM.
Bill Behavior was involved with it. So was Tom Ingram, Bill Behavior's co-author on various papers involving generalized inverse, or well, it's multi-valued inverse limits or something like that. I'm trying to remember the title of it, but this is where so you mentioned one of the things Bill Behavior gave you was a list of problems.
Yes.
But again, in the JIBLM, the journal, they frequently focus on people who've developed courses where they teach this way, and then they provide course notes that teachers can use with some discussion of what works better for them, what doesn't. But each teacher is considered their own researcher into the application of the method, essentially. And I think that's part of what Bill Behavior was doing, giving you that list of problems.
And I think that his son, right? His son is leading this journal.
His son is doing that. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I would love this conversation to continue. However, we should stop the webcasting, the live streaming at this point.
I thought it got stopped already because
no, we haven't, because I was waiting for an appropriate time. I'm sorry. No, this is fine. Please continue the conversation, but Priya, you can stop the live streaming at this point.
But when I was watching it before, it seemed to not play anymore after. Because I watch it simultaneously, so I can go back.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right. Maybe she's done it already. Never mind.
It seemed to have stopped when we started our questions.
Yeah. We put our hair down, as we say at this point. Just anything goes. So please,
I have the meme now for you. I have the meme now for you, so I can read it to you. How do they even? This is for the image that's behind my head. How do they even install this in the middle of the freaky